U2 about 2 decades ago. It's hard to believe that song is that old, but one of those timeless songs, I think, not only musically, but lyrically. And I like it because I think we're all here as seekers. And so I just wanted to open up for a couple minutes. I still haven't found what I'm looking for. What are you looking for? Whether coming here today or really more generally, broadly, what is it we're looking for?
Love.
Okay.
Acceptance. Respect.
Understanding.
Understanding?
Self-mastery.
Recognition.
Recognition.
Approval.
Approval, yeah.
Peace.
Peace.
Relief.
Relief.
Unconditional love.
Unconditional love.
Meaning and purpose.
Meaning and purpose. Connection.
Significance.
Freedom from fear.
Yeah. And so, how does this relate to addiction in general, do you think? This searching, seeking.
Addiction is the barrier.
Addiction is the barrier to finding or realizing those things that we're seeking. Now, how come it's so prevalent?
People use it to attain artificially those things.
Okay.
Addiction's a reaction because you don't have.
Because you don't have those things. You feel you
Compensation.
can't. What's that? Compensation.
Medication.
Yeah. So here we have a pretty diverse group of people, and my assumption and judgment is that when you called out all those different things that we're looking for, I bet each and every one of us could relate to each and every one of them. And like we said, the barriers and the reasons why we gravitate toward addictions, I bet we could relate also to each and every one of them. Why is it we have so many addictions? They compensate, they maybe seem like they give us a little false piece of what we're really looking for. We end up feeling hopeless, we settle. Yeah. And there's smoke and mirrors and there are illusions. And the topic of this whole workshop today is living recovery in an addictive world. And yes, there are people who say, well, the world is just what it is. You can't really ascribe an attitude to it because we do it. Some people might look at the world outside and say, oh, what a lucky day, yucky day. And others might say, what a beautiful day. Sometimes we look at the world and we just feel it's crazy. And other people just look at the world and say it is what it is, or there's a lot of good happening. Looking at the world through rose-colored glasses, some people see it as half empty, half full. And that's, I think, true on some level. And yet, I won't be too so sure that I'm not influenced by what's going on in the world on a subtle level. I read the papers, I see the news. Advertising is becoming more and more clever. Technology, in the case of life, is getting faster and faster. So, until I'm a fully enlightened master, I don't know that I can, on a human level, resist what's around me and not be influenced by it. So being aware of that. So what we have planned for the next roughly hour or so is to hit upon a few particular addictions that are lesser talked about and lesser understood, and maybe answer a few questions. Now we have limited time, but we're opening the door a bit. And we're going to focus on shoplifting. Let me see a show of hands. Is anybody here, is that news to anybody here by a show of hands that shoplifting could be an addiction? Is that a new concept to anybody here? Oh, I'm preaching to the choir then, good. But it is for a lot of people. And I think, Ronnie, as you...
I didn't realize it is an addiction until I realized me doing it how bad I was. And then I thought, what's going on? And I'm out of control. I couldn't control it.
So I say shoplifting can be addiction. It doesn't mean that every shoplifter is a shoplifting addict, right? So we're not, throwing the baby out with the bathwater. How about employee theft? How many of you have ever done anything dishonest or stolen from, in any regard, the workplace? Well, confidential. Okay, count all the people. We're including pens, paper clips, envelopes, stamps. How many of you ever came into work late and said you came in early or left early and said you stayed till the end? Anybody here? How many of you took a long lunch break? There's such a thing called time theft. And I'm not saying this from a judgment place, but it goes on a lot. And even what people consider to be theft in general, or stealing in general, or employee theft in general, a lot of times people don't even consider that stealing. We don't. And there's a statistic from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce that estimates that about 75% of Americans steal in one way, shape, or form from work. And actually that most do so regularly. Tax day was yesterday, although for those of you who didn't know, I guess we've got an extension until Monday to actually get a postmark. Royal Oak Post Office, by the way, is the one that's open the latest, I guess. For you procrastinators. How many of you, well, no, I'm not going to ask how many of you are totally honest on your taxes, but here's a big kind of thing too. And if you start to look at why we are dishonest, why we break the rules, how we justify, that's where it gets really interesting. And my judgment is that almost all of us, if not all of us, do some form of justification about our dishonesty, whether it's stealing, breaking rules, lying, cheating. We've got an epidemic with our young people, but not just our young people, in terms of cheating on tests and exams. Where does all this come from? And in one sense, living perhaps in this addictive world, it can be tough to say, why should I be honest in what appears to be a largely dishonest world? Why should I be honest when it seems like the politicians are dishonest? It seems like the CEOs are dishonest.
Really seems.
Well, I'm going to do my best not to speak in absolutes here. And for those who have children, I don't have children myself. Some of them are already raised, but some of them are still being raised, whether they're even 40, 50. How do we as parents, or as leaders in our community, model honesty? What kind of messages are they getting? Of course, kids are the first to say, well, you did this, or, well, you lied, well, you gossiped, right? So they're watching. They're watching us, and they're watching the world around them. And it can be pretty scary at times. Shopping and spending. We're talking in our government about a huge budget deficit, and all the arguing going out of there, and having the plate of the debt, all the different things that make up the debt. And a lot of the pundits kind of joke that, we're not addressing the meat and the potatoes of the debt. We're actually trying to take the parsley off the plate and call that, balancing our budget. And this is nonpartisan, or I'm not taking any particular side, but how did we get there? Well, not just the logistics of how we got there, wars and 9/11 and tax cuts for the wealthy and things like that. But what is the psychology behind it? And how many of you, in the recent past or even currently, have struggled with any form of financial disorder or debt? And it can be very embarrassing and shameful. And yet, look at our own government. Look at, we're part of the people, yes, we're the people. And look at the companies that are having trouble balancing their bottom lines a lot and laying people off. And then at the same time, they seem to have money for bonuses. And, what kind of ideas do we get about our society? And consumerism has increased dramatically over the last couple of decades, if you haven't already noticed. And again, some of you with children probably noticed. You said, boy, when I was a kid, I hardly asked for half the stuff that my kids ask me, and even expect. So, Confessions of a Shopaholic, the books and the movie that came out a few years ago. We're going through something. And then of course with the recession, I think the chickens have come home to roost. So how many people have lost their homes or had to file bankruptcy because maybe they, had too much debt, or thought the day would never come where you had to pay a piper. So this isn't a moral judgment, but there's something going on. And so, can shopping or spending be addictive? So a lot of times, that's a relatively new concept in the last decade or so. Because what do we tend to think about people who don't manage their money ideally? What kind of labels and what do we say?
Irresponsible.
Irresponsible. Spendthrift. Lazy. Selfish. What was it? Flakes. Superficial, materialistic. Stupid, yeah, I mean, downright, yeah. And now, there may be a few of those, right? There are some people perhaps, but again, not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I've met a lot of good people who got caught up in the consumerism. What are they looking for? What are they trying to gain? Is it an addiction? Is it a comfort? Are they buying into the messages of society? And then how about cluttering and hoarding? This has been getting a lot of news lately over the last few years with the A&E channel's Hoarders program and the TLC channel, Hoarding Buried Alive. I see, okay, I appreciate you. How many of you have ever struggled with, or know somebody who struggled with what you would consider cluttering disorder or hoarding disorder? Okay. So again, we're looking. Now, that's not typically classified exactly as an addiction, but for our purposes, it's at least a close relative or cousin. Okay, there are some unique things, but so those are some of the things we're going to get into in a few moments. But I wanted you to take the handout out of your folder. It's a 2-page handout, and it has Living, Recovery, and Addictive World with the list of the various addictions. You see the one where it has different columns and categories? There's 2 cards, not the bliss or abyss, we'll do that later, but the other side of it. Okay, so we're not going to, this is something for you to take home and work on a little bit too. But we want to start you in this conference thinking about all our addictions. And not just to take an inventory of those whom we know and love. You can do that later too. But, and I tried to group them in different categories. This is not an exhaustive list, but I think you might find that you have at least 2, if not more of these. So whether mentally or with the pen as I'm talking, if you want to kind of either check them off or circle them, even if you have a question mark, you might want to just put a question mark. Maybe you're not sure. And this is something to think about while we're moving through today's conference as well as beyond. Are there any that I didn't list that you wanted to note? And I can jot them down here on mine. You take a quick look here, but I kept a few spaces open. Are there any that I didn't get? Because this is probably not all of them, but are there any that jump right out and you say, hey, you didn't list this one? Just out of curiosity.
Cigar smoke.
Okay, so yeah. Cigar, yeah, that's cool.
Food. Well, you got one reading.
Yeah.
Alcohol.
Well, those are on there, but
You don't have therapy under the age.
is he addicted to therapy? Possibly? Oh, here's a good one, religion.
Oh, it's always looking outside. It's counseling.
Yeah,
Is it on here?
that's codependency, basically. Yeah, but thank you, thank you, Ronnie. So, I mean, and when I was doing this myself, and Deborah, we'll call her Dea, that's the name that I call her as my friend, my co-presenter in a moment. We did this kind of together, and I was kind of amazed at, how many, like Ken was talking about, I have the image of an onion. And often we get into counseling, therapy, or 12-step group work, initially for one particular addiction, might be alcohol, might be Al-Anon equivalency. And then as we peel back the layers, we see either that there are underlying layers of addictions that we didn't know were there, or how many of you have heard the magical game of transfer the addiction?
Yeah.
Okay, time for my prop. Anybody know the game Whack-A-Mole?
Oh, I love that game.
Doesn't it feel sometimes, just as you got one problem or one addiction managed, here comes the mole, you got to hit that one down, the other one pops up. I'll tell you, even preparing for the last couple months for this presentation was a wonderful process. we teach most what we need to learn. And I could tell, like, my addictions were really up. Anytime I'm talking about addiction and recovery, it's like my shadow side really wants to come up and, bite me in the butt and sabotage and fill me with self-doubt. And I've been in recovery for a long time from various addictions, and I just learned in the last year and a half that I had another addiction now that I'm working on it. And it can be frustrating at times. And yet, once I've gotten past that frustration, I've really seen this last year and a half of recovery to be quite a blessing. Peeling back that deeper layer of the onion. I was resistant at first and angry about it, and then I said, wow, this has really opened up a whole other avenue of self-awareness and peace and improvement in my sense of self. So it can be frustrating and scary and intimidating at first. And if we can remember, we're not alone. Here we are on this team. I was going to have a competition and give somebody an award for he or she who had the most addictions, but I'm not sure. It's not a competition. Deborah, did you have a hand up? Did you want to say something?
We were talking about addictions, and one of the teenagers, or even older, is self-mutilation.
Yeah. Yep, exactly. Yeah. Dr. Drew Pinsky, who some of you know from cable news, he has a new program on the Headline News Network every Monday through Friday at 9 p.m. It just started a week or two ago. It's actually pretty good. And you mentioned that it jogged my memory. I think on Monday he may be doing a topic on that, on cutting, in particular among young people. Now, piercing, right? Okay. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's define our terms. What is addiction? How do we know something is an addiction? We can talk a little bit about
Can't live without it, or with it.
When it's out of control.
Isn't it when it starts to detriment your life?
Yeah.
And when it starts being a detriment to your life, I mean, if you get 2 or 3 piercings, it's not really detriment.
Yeah, so we do need to be careful. In the realm of shopping, for instance, we have to be careful about imposing our values, because I might think somebody is a shopaholic because, frankly, I tend to be more of a frugalaholic. So from my worldview, that person, anything more extreme than me, might look like an addiction. It may not be true. Do you know that there are people actually who may be heavy in their body type, but may not be actually food addicts? It could be partly hereditary, it could be actually they love food, and a lot of these chefs who sometimes are a little more rotund, the old saying, never trust a skinny chef.
That's right.
Well, they may actually really love food. How about a wine connoisseur?
I agree.
Yeah. Although,
I have
from what I
friends.
hear, they're actually supposed to spit it out most of the time.
Well, that's what you're tasting,
Right.
you're drinking.
How about all you chocoholics out here? Fine taster of chocolate, right?
Oh, yeah.
How about these professional gamblers, whatever you think about them? Is there a difference between a professional gambler and a gambling addict?
I think there is, because professionals only play professional.
No, possibly.
They don't bust them out for the.
Yeah, and so we need to be careful. We need to be careful. So like you said, body piercing. And so when we're looking at ourselves, I think the key is, in all addictions, addiction is a progressive and chronic disorder or disease, meaning it tends to get worse over time, and it tends to last long periods of time. Now, it can be intermittent, and people can stop. You get a DUI, and you stop drinking for a while you're going to the court, and then you start again. And there is a difference between abstinence and recovery. We'll get into a little bit. But there's a loss of control, typically. There's often hiding, lying, or secrecy involved. There often are negative consequences. Though it's interesting, a lot of times we may see more clearly other people's addictions than our own, right, because of the denial system. I mean, somebody can get 3 drunk drivings, and it's real clear to their family member they've got a problem, but what do they often say? Hey, it's that stupid cop. That breathalyzer wasn't working. Or the hoarding thing, somebody might clearly see that this is causing all kinds of negative consequences. A health hazard, the person is isolating.
They're collecting.
Whatever,
I'm
I'm a collector.
They're collectors.
Right.
I've said that for years.
So, we do have to be careful, and ultimately it is up to the individual to finally decide whether he or she has an addiction or a problem and get the help for it. Most people actually don't. It's kind of discouraging in a way, even with all the knowledge that we now have about addiction recovery, there are still people who feel actually there's no such thing as addiction. There are people who still think that a lot. And even people in the medical field, it's a controversial niche, but there's people who think that. Most people never wake up out of denial to get help. We talk about the stages of change, these 5 stages of change. First, there's pre-contemplation, meaning you're at that very early stage where you don't even think there's a problem. And that's actually where most people live and die. Then stage 1 of change is contemplating, maybe I have a problem. 2 is investigating how I would get help for that problem. Most of the time, I try to do it on my own for a while, but I find out I can't. I might figure out a therapy or a support group, or there's a book out there. So that's stage 3, doing some level of investigation. Stage 4 is actually then following through with getting some help for the problem. Again, therapy, support groups, reading books, those things like. And then stage 4 can last quite a long time in terms of trying to get a handle on it. And then once getting a handle on it, stage 5 is maintaining abstinence and recovery. And that's where a lot of people slip up too. How many people have gone on diets and maybe gotten to their goal or close to their goal, and whee! And then what happens? Even our dear friend Oprah has talked very courageously about how. So it's an ongoing journey. When you do this exercise, partly here or at home, there's a little time limit. I apologize if there's anyone in the room who is above the age of 60. I kind of ran out of room. But what this might help with is also, as you are learning today more about what addictions you may have, that if you plug in, either you can rank them, you can circle them and then rank them, like you can even rank them number 1 in terms of the onset. When was the earliest one? I'll name that one number 1. Or sometimes we call it drug of choice. You can rank number 1 as being the one that you feel is your most deep or primary addiction that maybe has, like a whack-a-mole, come and gone throughout your life. And you could plug it in perhaps in your timeline life cycle. Where did the earliest one maybe manifest? I learned a lot about my most recent addiction, and first of all, I didn't even know I had it, and then I realized, oh, that started really early too. So you can plug it into your timeline. You might have a cluster of addictions that began to manifest often in our teen years as a result of loss, trauma, abuse, neglect. And then there might have been a few years where maybe addictions were not so prevalent, and then here they came again, or here a new one came. What happened? You can go back and say, what happened at that time in my life? Was there a loss, a transition, a dramatic change, death, divorce, illness, disappointment, rejection, a move? Even good times. A lot of times addicts are having the most trouble in life is going good. Man, got married, it was great. What? Stressful. I got a job promotion, great. More responsibility. Had my first child, woohoo! Pros and cons, right? That's why I don't have children, I rent to own. Okay. So this is just kind of an outline. Is this helpful to you to think about and maybe do a little bit as we're going through? Okay. So what I want to do is I want to spend about 5 minutes on shoplifting, about 5 minutes on employee theft, about 5 minutes on shopping, and then we're going to have a little more time for hoarding, which my friend and colleague Dea is going to help me with. And we'll have a little time for questions, and then we'll take a break at 11. Remember, this is kind of a little bit like 101. I see a hand, and it's Abby. Go ahead, Abby.
I'm just curious,
Yes.
if you don't mind sharing a little bit, since you mentioned you recently discovered that you have a new addiction. How did you recognize this addiction, that it's an addiction?
Well, I'll just say this, that do you know when life comes a-calling and it kind of knocks on your door and you're like, oh shit. Yeah, well, that kind of happened to me about 2 years ago where, have you heard of the program You've Been Served on PBS? Well, I was served with a lawsuit.
Processor.
Back in the summer of '08, so about 2.5 years ago. And what initially felt like just a huge unfairness and burden and curse turned out to be a blessing. I didn't know it at the time, even though I'm familiar with the concept of life comes knocking on our door with a crisis and there's always an opportunity. Sometimes people even talk about, and I don't mean this tongue-in-cheek or lightly, the gift of cancer.
Oh.
And I'm not saying it's hunky-dory and peachy keen and that people don't struggle, But some people get to the point in any life crisis where they can see through the tunnel of light and find out, oh my God, was this God or the universe's way of giving me this opportunity? But this is long and short, so this began a process of really a lot of painful struggle, and then having some challenges with my family of origin around the level of support, emotionally and financially, that I was requesting, which got me into therapy to look at my role in my family issue and some real hurt, betrayal, and abandonment rejection issues. And through that, I discovered some other addictions on top of it. And so it turned out to be a good thing. We were able to settle a lawsuit. It took a whole year. It cost me $50,000. I'm a lawyer too, by the way, so this might have been karma. But let me just see a show of hands. How many of you have had an experience of life coming knocking at your door? Oh shit! And of course, most of us are not fully enlightened. We say, "Oh, welcome in. Come on in. Please empty out my whole house and furniture. I've been waiting for you." Not many of us. I'm getting a little better at that. But how many show of hands have had at least one or two of those experiences? Maybe recently, a health challenge. Breakup, financial crisis, loss. A lot of people going through that now, loss of their jobs. Yeah, so that's it in a nutshell. In the interest of time, I'd love to tell my story, and if Kevin doesn't show up, I will tell you my story. But let's talk about shoplifting for a moment. And I will tell you this much, that even though I'm primarily here talking as a therapist or a professional, shoplifting was one of my primary addictions. I'm 45 years old now, and I shoplifted intermittently, mostly on rather than off, for about a 10-year period from age 15 to 25. Why do you think people shoplift? What?
They want something for nothing.
Thank you. That's the title of my book, ma'am, which I encourage you to purchase.
I really think they shoplift because it's like getting away with something. It's a
Okay.
scam.
Okay.
They're smarter than the marketplace.
Yes, okay.
I was in retail for 19 years.
Okay.
I know the laundry trick.
I can tell we're going to have trouble with you, right?
I'm a process server. You already have trouble.
Okay. Dan?
Entitlement.
Entitlement. Yeah. Paul, my good friend Paul.
The emotional thrill.
Bob?
Feeling alive.
Feeling?
The thrill of getting, of doing and getting away with it.
Okay. No? Did you have a hand up?
Mine was a thrill.
Okay.
Power?
Power. Yeah. Yeah.
Darwinism,
No.
survival of the fittest, so
Darwin,
smarter than that.
I never thought about that.
These are all great, yeah. So a lot of those I think are really spot on. A lot of times, how do we think of a typical shoplifter? How do we judge them? What do we think it's about?
Most of the time, it's because they're just thieves. It's not a problem. It's just, they want something free, they're just.
Thou shalt not steal. How about Winona Ryder, Lindsay Lohan, and all the people who you see in the news from time to time? It can't typically be about the money for people who are multimillionaires, right? At least on the surface. Although we know people who often are brought up in poverty, they
Well,
make
look at their
$1,000 in the bank and
family
still
and
feel
their
poor.
surroundings and
Yeah.
everything. It's,
Yeah.
You don't think they just do that for the publicity?
No.
I think they deserve it.
Yeah, entitlement. So there's a lot of different reasons. I will just tell you in a nutshell, when I began shoplifting around age 14, 15, it was several years after my folks were divorced, and like a lot of you, I became kind of the caretaker and the hero of my family, and I tried to make this perfect, and I was always giving, giving, giving. And what I learned is for some people, when we overgive, all kinds of bad things can eventually happen. We stuff our anger, we stuff our own needs, and for me, shoplifting began to take root as a secret way to act out my other side.